11. Show off. Impressive demonstrations and party tricks, in which you learn some delightful mind reading tricks that you can use to impress your friends and cause fear and panic wherever you go. Thought reading as a form of entertainment is a little different from the everyday variety, of course, but for once, there won't be lots of new techniques to learn, because these demonstrations are all based on the methods, or variations of them, that you've learned in this book. The only difference is that we present them differently than before, and to far more spectacular results. Just as with everything else, these tricks will take practice to give good results. Don't expect to manage all the demonstrations perfectly the first time you try them. There's no such thing as a free lunch, but with some patience, you won't have any trouble mastering them. In fact, without being aware of it, you've already started practicing some of them. Just remember that these demonstrations can have a very strong impact on the people who experience them. You know what you can and can't do, but your participants won't know the true limit of your powers. Feel free to explain that you can see straight into their minds or manipulate them. It will not quite. These party tricks can make you either a very popular person or extremely lonely, depending on how you handle the reactions of your friends and family. Visible thoughts. You know the thoughts somebody has in her mind. This demonstration is basically about getting someone to think of an image, a sound, or a feeling. By secretly observing her eye movements, you can see which of the options she is thinking of. As you've probably realized, this involves using the EAC model from pages 63 to 64 to determine which thought she has in her mind. We needn't concern ourselves with whether the model is scientifically valid or not. For this trick to work, it is enough that you know what to look for. It's a really simple trick, but it can have quite a shocking impact on the person you perform it for. The following example is not intended to be repeated word for word. I've written it to allow me to explain the different stages of the demonstration in a clear way. When you've understood the principle, it's up to you to pick suitable themes or thoughts to use. But for the time being, let's imagine that you're in some social situation where there are several other people around. Just one would be enough, of course, but there's no harm in having an audience. Let's imagine that someone has volunteered to take part in an interesting experiment in mind reading. You start out like this. We're going to conduct an experiment in mind reading. Thoughts are obviously very personal things, so we'll stick to thoughts that we'll create now, together. That way I'm certain not to uncover any private thoughts that you've been having. Just relax and follow my instructions. Are you ready? Then let's begin. Here comes the first thought. I want you to visualize your living room as clearly as you can. Do it now. Visualize the room. Try to include as many details as you can. Furniture, pictures _ build up an image of the whole room. Here, check for definite eye movements, for instance up and to the left. Any sign will work, as long as it is clear and consistent. Good. Now you can erase that image. Instead, I want you to imagine the chorus of your favorite song. Take your time. I want you to really hear the music or the tune playing in your head. Now check for a clear and different sign for sound. For instance, the eyes to one side, and perhaps even the head to one side. If you don't get a good reading for sound, perhaps because your participant isn't very tonal, just continue with a kinesthetic question as though nothing happened. Remember, your volunteer and the people watching you have no idea where this is going. Let the music fade now. The last thing I want you to think about is how it feels to take a shower. Feel the nice warm water spraying over your body. Feel the slippery floor or the bathtub under your feet. Now that you have noted eye signs for at least 2 of the 3 senses, you can ask her to go through the sensory experiences once more if you like, to make sure that her eye movements are consistent. Feel the water. If you don't seem to get the same cadence in the control round, so that she doesn't suddenly change her sensory the room experience of the different impressions you have given her. But if you have picked up some good, clear eye movements, you can proceed. Okay, now you've got some randomly selected, but quite different thoughts in your mind. Next, I want you to think of one of these, the living room or the shower, or one of the 3. If you got good readings for all 3, don't tell me which one you've chosen. Think about one of those 2. If it's the room, you can see it clearly in front of you again, and if it's the shower, you can feel the warm water on your skin again. Now, all you need to do is pay attention to which way her eyes move. Since that reveals what she's thinking of, tell her what thought she is concentrating on. Prepare for screams, let her try a few more times, and freak her out every time by always being able to read her mind. Remember, throughout the demonstration, what's going on will be very obvious to you. But believe me, it won't be to anyone else. No one knows where you're headed when you ask about the different sensory experiences, and any onlookers will merely be watching an interesting process. Your volunteer won't know that she is moving her eyes, just as you probably weren't before we discussed the EAC model. When we think, we are focused internally, and have no idea of what our bodies are doing. We know still less of what we're doing with our faces, which, of course, we can't even see. The previous example involving rooms and showers would probably be a little strange if you tried to replicate it word for word. I just used it to demonstrate the principle, because your choice is entirely free, as far as the different impressions are concerned. You can make the mind reading as personal and intimate as you like. The trick is just to divide the impressions into visual, sound, and sensual/physical sensations. One example for very good friends might be, in somewhat truncated form. I want you to see your current boyfriend clearly in front of you. Now I want you to hear the voice of your last boyfriend as he speaks to you. And now I want you to remember what it was like when you hugged your very first boyfriend. Now I want you to think of the one of these three men that you love the most, just as you did a moment ago, but don't say anything. The possibilities are endless. The important thing here is for you to understand the principle. After that, you're only limited by your imagination as to the sorts of thoughts you choose to use. In many situations it's probably best to use impersonal thoughts, of objects or music, but if you think the situation and the company are right for it, you can use something like the last example to make the whole experience a lot more entertaining. Let your volunteer choose the thought she has the most emotional involvement in, the thought that means the most to her, what she most wants to do, what she's the most afraid of, and so on. The good thing here is that you don't actually need to know the contents of the thoughts. You don't need to know what her favorite song is or what her boyfriend looks like in order for this to work. You just need to pay attention to how the eyes are moving. What makes this demonstration so effective is that your volunteer can think about things that are never revealed to you, yet you can still tell her what she's thinking about. A bird in hand. You know which hand an object has been concealed in. This demonstration involves you repeatedly guessing which hand somebody has hidden a small object in. I will give you 3 different ways of doing this. I suggest you do this in sequence, and use a new method each time you repeat the demonstration. The more times you can repeat this, the more impressive it gets, since you do have a 50% chance of getting the first attempt right after all. If you do it 3 times, 1 incorrect guess won't hurt you too much, either. After all, this mind-reading stuff is difficult. Apart from demonstrating mind-reading, you will give a demonstration of influence and control. Your participant will, to everyone else's delight, and his own mild frustration, be completely defenseless in your hands. The basic setup is to ask somebody to conceal a small object in one of his hands, something you can hold inside your hand, like a ring, coin, rock, or a piece from a game. Then, you ask him to put both hands behind his back, explain to him that he is free to switch hands as he likes. Then he should choose which hand he will finally conceal the object in. When he has decided on a hand, ask him to close both hands into fists, behind his back, and then bring them out, in front of his body. Let the games begin. The first test. This method is a good one to begin with, as it is almost embarrassingly simple. All you need to do is use your ability to observe subtle physical changes in your volunteer. When he is holding his hands behind his back, switching the object back and forth between his hands a couple of times, you stand with your back to him, ask him to hold his empty hand straight out, and raise the hand with the object to his temple. This might sound strange, but I want you to fill your thoughts with feelings, the sensation of this hand. Take a couple of seconds to create a mental image of it, and then imagine it filling up your entire brain. What you're really after is to get him to hold his hand to his temple for 5 to 7 seconds. The things you're saying are just there to mask this fact. Ready? Then you can take your hand down again, and put it next to the other one. Do it now. Right after you say now, you turn around and take a quick look at her hands. Don't ruin around too soon. You don't want your audience to believe you snuck a peek while he lowered his arm. Give his hands a quick glance. That's all you'll need. One of the hands will be much paler than the other one. It hasn't had the same blood flow, because it was held up to the temple. So you know that the pale hand is the one with the object in it. But don't give this away at once. To deepen the mystery, you should wait until the hands are both the same color again. After having quickly checked to see which hand it is, you look your volunteer in the eyes and are silent for a few moments, before dramatically revealing which hand holds the object. I can see it clearly. There is a crystal clear image in there. An image of your right hand. Open your right hand, please. The second test. This time, your volunteer will be perfectly still, which will make the trick all the more astounding. This method demands more of your observational skills. However, ask her to hold her arms extended in front of her and to look straight ahead. Make sure her arms are high enough and close enough together so that both of her arms are within her immediate field of vision. Now ask her to concentrate hard on the hand holding the coin or other object, without giving anything away. Then wait for a few seconds. If you're lucky, you may already have seen a slight twist of the head, or even a quick glance at the hand holding the object. These movements can be very small, however. Here's a tip. Look to see if the tip of her nose starts pointing in either direction. If you observe any such movement, you can end it here and reveal which hand has the object. If not, you can proceed by asking her to create an image of the hand in her mind and to visualize it clearly in front of her. She won't be able to resist taking a quick, almost undetectable look at the correct hand. It's in the periphery of her field of vision, and the temptation to just take a quick look at it will be too big to resist. This will either happen unconsciously, after which you mind read your way to finding the object, or she will realize that you made her look, which is a good reaction, too. After all, this is mind reading and influence we're dealing with here. Ask her to place her hands behind her back again, to switch the object around a few times. When she's done, just as before, you ask her to extend her arms with closed fists. The THLRD test. The last method is completely based on suggestion. If you're not sure it will work, have somebody try it on you first. You'll see it works really well. It's a true classic in the world of suggestion. Your participant has switched the object around for the last time and is holding her arms out again. On the first couple of attempts, the angle of the arms wasn't such a big matter, but now you ask her to hold her arms straight out, parallel to the floor, then ask her to close her eyes. This is the first stage of the suggestion. I'm going to tell you a couple of things. All you need to do is listen. Try to imagine what I am saying as well as you can, but make sure not to move your arms. Hold them absolutely still, okay? Now, relax. Good. Now I'd like you to imagine the object you're holding slowly getting heavier, and heavier, and heavier. It's as though it were made of solid lead. It's getting so heavy you can barely hold it anymore. Feel it getting heavier. It's twice as heavy as it was when we started. You should have a result by this point. One of the participants' arms will sink toward the floor. As soon as you see a small motion in one hand, small enough that only you can see it, you can end the demonstration with mind reading if you want. Why not just open your right hand and let that awful heavy object fall out? The spectators, who will have been a few feet away, will swear the hand never moved. But if this is your last demonstration, you might as well make it a really powerful one, and continue with the next step. Now I'd like you to imagine that there is a string tied to your other arm. At the other end of that string, there is a helium balloon. It's a big balloon, and it's making your hand feel so light, it doesn't weigh a thing. It wants to fly. The balloon is trying to lift you toward the ceiling, but you're held in place by the lump of lead in your other hand, which just keeps getting heavier. In fact, by now you're actually holding a whole bucket of those heavy lumps of lead. Keep making one hand heavier and the other one lighter. In the end, the participant will be standing there with her arms wide apart, one pointed down and the other one pointed up, like a big letter K. How far apart the arms go will vary from person to person, but it is very rare for the difference to be too small to notice. Keep your eyes closed for a while longer. Have you felt your arms move at all? The answer will be no. If there are other people present, ask them to state out loud which hand they believe the object is hidden in. The spectators won't have any trouble knowing which hand it is. Of course, keep your eyes closed, and stand still. You don't want her hands to start moving too early. Is it true that the object is in your right hand? Since you haven't moved your arms, all our spectators must be mind readers, too, right? Open your eyes. Your participant will be very surprised to see her arms point in two completely different directions. Instead of straight ahead, take a bow. And don't forget to tell the audience to give your participant a hand, too. Back and forth, a classic of the supernatural, with a natural explanation. I had to think long and hard before deciding to include this section here. I was afraid it would be dismissed as nonsense, destroy the book's credibility, and make people throw it out of the nearest open window. But I figured that if you're still reading this, you have the knowledge you need to be capable of realizing that it's no stranger than anything else, and it works by the same principles as everything else in this book. I'm talking about pendulums. Yep, pendulums. Those patchouli-scented hippie crystals on a string that people with henna-dyed hair claim can reveal your future fortunes. Pendulums. But, actually, pendulums work according to the psychophysiological principle that says that all of our thoughts have some effect on our bodies. Before you dismiss this as utter nonsense, I'd like you to please at least try this out, empirically, and get an understanding for what it is you're dismissing. If you don't, you're just being superstitious. I understand if you're experiencing doubts and feeling very skeptical right now, but please trust me. Convince yourself. Get a piece of string, about 8 inches long, and tie a ring or something similar to one end of the string. It should be an object of some weight, at least. If the object is light, the pendulum won't work as well. Then draw a circle, about 6 inches across, on a sheet of paper. Draw a vertical line through the middle of the circle, and write yes next to the line. Then draw a horizontal line through the circle, and write no next to it, or use the circle printed below. Yes. Hold the loose end of the string between your thumb and index finger. Let the pendulum rest above the intersection of the lines, at the center of the circle. This is always the starting position. Now lift the pendulum, so that it is hanging straight over the intersection of the crosshairs. Concentrate on the yes line. Think, yes exercise to yourself, loud and clear, and notice the pendulum beginning to move back and forth over the line, or make an effort not to move your hand. You can support it with your other hand to give it more stability. As you have noticed, it doesn't make any difference. The pendulum will keep moving back and forth along that line. Now switch to the no line. Instead, concentrate and think, no. Without any conscious action on your part, the pendulum will suddenly change direction now. It will follow the no line instead. Make sure you're still keeping your hand still. Now think circle, and see how the pendulum starts making a circular motion over the paper instead. Alternate between yes, no, and circle a few times, until you're convinced. It's all because of something called ideomotor responses. When you think, you unconsciously cause small-scale muscle reactions that the human eye can't detect, but when amplified by the length of the string and the weight of the pendulum, they're suddenly very obvious. The pendulum feels magical because we can see it move. despite the person who is holding it swearing, and us seeing, that his hand is completely still. Perhaps that makes it seem reasonable to ascribe the movements of the pendulum to some arcane cause or other. Books about pendulums never wait long to introduce colorful concepts like holy guardian angel or magical force of the pendulum. My ambition isn't to make the world a less interesting place by claiming there is no such thing, but I think it's unnecessary to look any further for an explanation than to our own physiological responses. The best explanation of how the pendulum works that I've read was formulated by pendulum experts Greg Nicholson and Joseph Polanski, veterans of the business. The human nervous system is the communication system of the body. Through the nervous system, the brain gets all its data and then transmits the appropriate messages back to those organs. It is not the pendulum itself, therefore, which is giving you the answers. It is your higher intelligence communicating through the nervous system which gives you signals. Okay, I admit that it's not obvious that the unconscious mind is a higher intelligence, but, as they say, close enough. So the reason why we only see the pendulum move and not the hand, is that the pendulum amplifies the small, undetectable motions of the hand, muscle reactions that are too small for us to even notice and that are beyond our conscious control. The idea of idiomotoric responses is not news. It was first expressed in 1852 by psychologist William B. Carpenter, who also invented the actual term idiomotor action. The idea was clarified by the famous philosopher and psychologist William James, who I mentioned previously, in 1890. Whenever movement follows unhesitatingly and immediately the notion of it in the mind, we have idiomotor action. It is no curiosity, but simply the normal process. Apparently, nobody was listening. The seemingly mystical powers of the pendulum, and people's ignorance of how and why it works, have caused some incorrect ideas about what it can meaningfully be used for. It's a popular alternative to dowsing rods, for finding lost objects. This could work, but only if you unconsciously know where the object is, even though you've forgotten it for the moment, like where you put your car keys. But holding one over a map to try to find missing people, which has both been suggested and done, just doesn't make sense. If it should actually work, that would only indicate that the person holding the pendulum actually did have information about the missing person's whereabouts. And if that's the case, you're probably in bad company. And now that you know the pendulum doesn't need to interact with the spirit world, or with ley lines, to work, and that it's really no more mysterious than any other bodily reaction you have when you think of something, you can go pick this book up from the lawn outside of your window. Now the time has come for you to mystify people with your discoveries about the pendulum. The first test: instruct your participant how to hold the pendulum, and explain about the starting position at the crosshairs inside the circle. If she wants to stop the pendulum, she can lower it to the crosshairs again, but she should never stop the pendulum with her other hand. Use the same circle with the yes and no lines as before. When you're experimenting with pendulums, a circular motion means doubt or that there will be no answer given. Begin by having your participant think yes, no, and circle, just like you did before, to show her how it works. This will also give you an opportunity to determine how large this person's reactions are, and how long it takes for the pendulum to change direction. Be careful to explain to the participant that she shouldn't move her hand at all. In the first test, you choose a question that is answered with a. My editor would like to point out that if you actually did throw the book out of the window, you wouldn't be able to read my suggestion that you go out to get it back. He's right, of course. You should never throw this book anywhere, no matter what I say. Disclaimer: page 227 has been lost and I couldn't find it. Sorry for the inconvenience. So we're now starting from page 228. The pendulum as a lie detector. Use the pendulum as a lie detector. This is simply a visual example of unconscious contradictory signs, like you read about in chapter 7 on lying. Your participant will try to say one thing with his words, but his body will signal something else, and the pendulum will amplify it. Let's say you're in a room with 5 people besides you and your participant. Ask him to rest the pendulum on the crosshairs, and silently pick one of the people in the room. He's going to think of this person during the experiment. Explain that you're going to speak the names of everybody who is present, one after the other. For each person, you will ask if this is the person your participant is thinking of. He is to answer no every time, even when it's the right person. When you're sure he's chosen somebody, and that he's understood the instructions, you ask him to pick the pendulum up. Just as in the previous experiment, you will begin with a certain outcome, to make sure he's playing along. Mention somebody who isn't present, and ask if that is the person he picked. Wait for the no from the pendulum. If you're working with somebody who only gives small responses, you can, if you need to, ask about another person who isn't present. Once you have a good, clear response, you continue with the 5 people in the room. Is it Harry? Is it Ron? And so on. Your test subject is supposed to answer no to catch question. But one of the questions, is it Hermione? Will make the pendulum swing over to yes, irrespective of what the test person herself is claiming. The pendulum will reveal his lie without fail. For this reason, you should make sure the lie concerns a trivial matter, so there aren't any bad feelings afterward. When everybody has left the party because of the 2 people arguing in the kitchen, and you end up renting a bad movie, with Ben Stiller in it and consuming an entire bag of potato chips, and a huge bottle of Coke. I hope you will be brave enough to try out these demonstrations or experiments. Most of them are easier to perform than you think. All they require is that you use the skills you've already been practicing, for you to have faith in yourself, and, perhaps at first, no matter whether you're a woman or a man, you will need some massive cojones.